During World War II, a new type of weapon would be used. These weapons would be called tanks, a name that stuck with them ever since 1916. These vehicles would be instrumental in the reason why World War II would be won in Western Europe so quickly, and would pave the way for many armies in the world around 1939. The Soviets, who had the most amount of tanks in the world, would use these special vehicles to crush and overwhelm the enemy. These tactics would be shown in the Winter War against Finland, however would prove faulty in the face of the heavily fortified positions the Finnish had.
能够去你的餐厅用餐，那么我会感到非常的荣幸。
With SE-152 being made, it would be decided it would be using the KV-1S chassis, which later in 1943, the KV-1S chassis would be discontinued. With the successes from the SE-152, the SE-152 having its chassis being discontinued would deprive the Soviet Army of a vital tank, and would cost the Soviets more lives during the Great Patriotic War. This would make the Soviets to make a decision of whether or not to make a new tank. Later, the Soviets would make a decision on using the modern IS chassis for the new vehicle. The new IS chassis led the NKTP making the Object 241. The Object 241 would be very similar to the SC-152, however with a higher superstructure, but slightly less sloped side armor, and a slightly more rectangular body. The armor on the newly made tank would be quite similar in thickness to the SC-152, with only being 30mm thicker, which didn't reduce the amount of room inside the tank. Mainly the only difference between the SC-152 and the Object 241 would be lower suspension and a two-piece gun hamlet. With Object 241 being finished, it would be reclassified as the ISU-152, production starting at the end of 1943, replacing the old SC-152. Now, with all this said, you may say, hey, wouldn't there be some difficulties with making a new tank? Really some sort of issue? And the answer to that is yes. There was problems with making the ISU-152. The issue would be during production of the ISU-152, there wouldn't be enough cannons being produced. So the Soviets got into thinking, then they realized that the 122mm cannon had high availability, so they decided to put it into the ISU-152 chassis. The outcome would be very good. The conversion would be very easy, mainly due to the gun carriages of the 152 and 122 were both the same, making it very easy to produce. This new tank would start production in December of 1943 and would be named the ISU-122. From December of 1943 and May of 1945, 1,885 ISU-152 tanks would be made, and as production would cease in 1947, making 3,242 units of ISU-152 to be made. As with most SPGs at the time made by the Soviets, the fighting compartment for the crew were split in two, the crew compartment itself, and the engine and transmission, all in the rear. The cannon would be slightly right of the center of the tank, and the tank would have a limited traverse of around 12 degrees both sides. The crew would consist of the driver, gunner, loader, lockman, and then the commander. Due to the configuration, the driver, gunner, and loader would be on the left of the cannon, and the commander and the lockman were right of the cannon. Although the tank was used regularly with 5 crew, it could also consist of 4 crew members if the loader was out of action, making the lockman be the one loading the gun. During the war, the ISU-152 would be improved, which in this case, The chassis would change from an IS-1 chassis to a IS-2 or a IS-2 1944 variant. Other improvements would be the mantlet armor being thickened, the cannon being replaced by newer versions, a Dishka anti-aircraft machine gun being installed on the roof of the tank, the radio for tank-to-tank communication being improved to 10 RK, and the last change being the fuel capacity being increased. Other improvements would include the ISU-152 being modernized, which would include the installment of night vision sights, the engine being replaced, the Dishka being replaced, the max ammunition capacity being increased to 30, more armor being added, and a massive increase of capacity of fuel.
What the No!
Although many think that there is only one ISU-152, they would be incorrect. There was 4 different ISU-152s built. One such ISU-152 would be the ISU-152BM. This ISU tank was the attempt to increase the firepower of the ISU-152. However, it ended up with only one prototype and developed in April of 1944. This ISU-152 would be made to fight heavily armored German tanks such as the Elefant and the Jagdtiger. The different features of the tank is that it would have the 152.4mm BL-8 long gun, which would be 26 feet long, which is quite impressive. Other features is that its gun had a velocity of 800 meters per second, and it could also penetrate 203 millimeters of RHA at 90 degrees up to 2,187 yards. Even though this tank seems like it was unstoppable, it still had its flaws. First of all, it cannot penetrate the Jagdtiger frontally. Another issue is the gun. Due to the very long gun, it reduced its maneuverability. The tank also had other issues, like low ammo storage of only 21 shells, unreliable muzzle brake, and breach. And the last is the performance of the shells. Even though the tank had a ton of issues, most stuff would get fixed after the war. The second variant of the ISU-152 is the Object 704. This tank would be a lot more different from the normal ISU-152. Instead of the tank using an IS-1 chassis, it would be developed on the Kielowitz, which is the prototype for the IS-3 project. Physical features of this tank would include a reduced height, a longer barrel, and an absence of a muzzle brake. Other features of the tank was a low ammo count, 4 different hatches on the roof of the superstructure. Some other facts of the tank would be that the gun could fire a shell at the velocity of 655 meters per second, and the tank could store 90 liters of fuel in its external fuel tanks. The Object 704 would have 2 weapons, a 152mm cannon and a 50 cal Dishka. The 152mm cannon would prove vital as anti-infantry, a bunker buster, and even an anti-tank device. Now, you may wonder, how thick was the armor? Since the Soviets placed thick armor at weird angles on the mantlet, and since the mantlet was on top of the whole armor, the armor was 320mm thick. The whole armor would be 180mm thick. Now, you may think this is thick, and well, you are correct. This tank would live to become the most armored Soviet tank in World War II. Although this tank was the most armored tank in World War II, the Soviets didn't put this tank into service due to how complicated it was for the crew due to the absence of the muzzle brake.